and the bulls do not react as well to the purple. Welcome back to Perpetual Jank Machine, the podcast that is delivered to you continuously when it's done. I'm John.
And I'm Miles.
Miles, how frequently do you ship your software to clients?
I think we do a bi-weekly basis for our main stuff.
Okay. Do you have any kind of a similar schedule for your side projects?
No, I don't think I've released anything formally. But I push stuff to my GitHub whenever I finish a good portion of it, and I finish commenting and neatening it up. I just throw some garbage out there, and then I like to fix it up. So it's ready when it's ready for that kind of stuff.
I do a similar thing, except I release something, and then 2 years later, after nothing has happened, I release a single bug fix. And the people rejoice.
You gotta keep people on their toes, yeah. Although you give some people some false hope for that one. You know, they're like, oh, he fixed that one. Maybe he'll fix my bug too, the one that's really been irritating me.
That one's never getting fixed.
Just to be ghosted.
It's only the bugs that I care about.
Yeah.
On a professional basis, I do the, God, I wish we had continuous releases so bad. They just solve so many problems. They really do.
What do you mean by that?
Releasing whenever you feel like it. Tuesday evening, you're feeling particularly happy today. You just want to push out a nice release. You got a cool feature lined up. You just press the release button, out it goes. Whereas other projects might only release every 2 weeks or every month or every quarter or whenever the feature is done, but it's a really, really, really long time and you are not allowed to release before that because of some contractual thing or something like that.
I don't like continuous release that much, if I'm going to be honest. I think it brings about a certain attitude to programming where it's we'll fix it later, and you never do. Whereas if you do something less continuous release, you're more likely to test it rigorously, or at least you should be. I guess maybe not always.
That's an interesting point. So the idea that you have a deadline every certain amount of time puts a fire under your butt to make sure that what you are putting out.
I was thinking more iterative design versus the older method whenever, things were on hardware. And once it was released, it's done. It's never getting updated again because it's on a physical piece of hardware.
Well, I guess that's kind of part of it. I mean, the ultimate discontinuity of release is releasing once and then never again, or releasing once and then maybe once in a year for the greatest hits edition.
Yeah. It's release it once and then fix any major things. But after that, it's kind of you got to buy the DLC if you want it after that. Whereas continuous release, my impression of it was more iterative design, we'll release this feature and then we'll release the next feature, it's something that is continually supported and continually added upon and stuff like that.
Well, that is an important part of iterative design, is the shorter your cycles, the better you're able to capture feedback, and also the less likely it is that you're going to have a big release that's really bad that breaks something because all the changes are always really, really, really tiny.
Gotcha. Well, if we're talking more than a strict release schedule versus a more freeform release schedule, I think I do prefer the more strict release schedules, if that makes sense. I feel like it's nice if you aren't too committed towards either, because I think a fixed release schedule potentially could allow you to get some proper testing done. In my experience, whenever you try to release something outside of that cycle, as soon as your bug fix is done, somebody wants to get it out because they feel like that bug fix breaks everything. I mean, the bug fix will solve their major problem. You know what I'm saying? So they're really pushed to get that bug fix out as fast as possible, which can cause problems in other areas and can cause other things to break and stuff like that. So I don't think that's quite ideal. I don't know. I guess it's good to not be committed too much to either side.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like that's kind of orthogonal to the whole releasing schedule, because your customers and your product owners and your marketing people are going to be your customers and your product owners and your marketing people regardless of how you release. And honestly, pretty much nobody except for you and your product owner knows how you release or on what schedule. Their bugs are still going to be horrible, critical, breaking things, even though it's the color of some text is maybe a little bit too dark or something like that, regardless.
True.
I feel like that might not have all that much bearing unless you have clients that are hyper aware of how
I do
something releases. If Patch Tuesday is part of your client's vocabulary, then maybe, but
yes, it is, unfortunately. But anyway, sorry.
Oh, how I pity you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not the best. I get frequent emails like, dude, we have found a breaking bug. And I'm like, oh no. And then like a half an hour later, oh wait, that was my bad. I screwed something up. My bad. And I'm like, all right, bud. All right.
But I feel like a continuous release schedule kind of allows you to adapt to these and fix them just as they come up rather than having to like, well, I guess it kind of depends on how critical it is. But if there is a critical bug, instead of having to go through this whole rigmarole of doing an out of cycle release and all the paperwork and pomp and circumstance that requires, you just put it out.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you had to choose strongly between one or the other, I agree. I think the continuous is often better.
But then sometimes you can also wind up in a situation where like nothing gets released for a month if you don't watch yourself with deploy on demand.
Yeah, I think continuous release is really good for more minor things. I think even if you don't need like a rigorous schedule to set a due date for like more large projects, just so you don't like, screw around and actually prioritize larger projects. Because like you said, people will always be like talking about their bug fixes and stuff like that, trying to push that through and like trying to, light a fire under you just to get those out. So then oftentimes larger projects will get put by the wayside until it's too late and the client's like, oh wait, we wanted that and you've been working on it for like a year. And then you're like, yeah, I've been working on it for like a year, but I haven't actually been working on it for a year because you keep trying to get me to send out all this other stuff.
I suppose that is true. If your clients are aware that something gets fixed every 2 weeks, regardless, the train leaves then, that can reduce the amount of pressure on you, I guess, so you can better allocate your developer resources to things that actually matter in the product roadmap rather than just everybody getting distracted all of the time about bug fixes and tiny things.
Yeah.
But I also feel like continuous releasing is somewhat beneficial to that as well, because a scheduled release where the train departs every month or something like that can also distract from work on features because the end of the month might be coming up and then you have to kind of remember what you put in all month and then make sure it's QA'd, make sure it's ready to go, and then talk to the people that need to be talked to for that release.
Yeah.
Whereas if you were not doing that, you could just be working on the feature that you wanted to develop over the span of a month or two.
Speaking of QA, I think they really get the short end of the stick with near the end of the release cycle if you do have a more strict cycle, because the bug fix gets pushed out like the day before and then someone's like, I need that in that patch, like that next patch. And you're like, okay. And then you got to send it out to QA and be like, hey, I need this tested by the end of today. And then they're like, yeah, that ain't happening, bud.
Yeah, definitely. Because when you are continuously releasing, pushing something out by a day isn't going to kill you. Whereas if you're doing a strict 1 month release where every single team or every single product team has to have something ready to put on the train and the train leaves the station regardless, delaying something by a day can absolutely kill you. So the question is, are you a good enough workplace to say, okay, well, let's not ruin the QA people's week and maybe leave something off? Or do we make all the devs and the QAs and all of this crunch on these couple of features? And, even if you're like a good workplace that doesn't require your QA guy to like work a 10-hour day every month or something like that, or a 12-hour day,
yeah,
that still distracts developers then, because that manpower has to come from somewhere. So you might be putting other resources on it, but that's distracting from what those resources were going to otherwise be doing.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're just doing Kanban style, all right, it's done, let's ship it, that's not even a factor. Like if you need an extra day to QA it, then take the extra day to QA it, unless like the only point at which that would be a problem is if your clients were just killing you based on it, but that's rare.
Well, the worst case scenario is you send it off to QA and in this scenario, you're hoping it doesn't get sent back. And there is a very real possibility it does get sent back. And then what are you going to do? You've definitely missed the boat at that point.
Yeah, precisely. That's when both the dev and the QA has to pull like a 16-hour day. The days just keep getting longer and longer, and then they're both really not happy about that.
Oh yeah, like literally, there's a hard release for like a update for the thing we're building on top of, and the client has been getting us to work on this feature for like a long time, and it's just been sitting on the shelf for a while. Nobody's been testing it, and then finally, like it just recently got tested. And then I was doing some of the testing and I'm like, this is broken. And they're like, no, it's not broken. It works fine on my computer. And like, well, it doesn't work on our client's computer and it doesn't work on my computer, the other dev's computer. Like, I don't know what's going on, bro.
Oh, those famous last words.
It turns out it was working on their computer, but like, yeah. So then we had to like troubleshoot forever. And then he's like, oh, okay, I fixed that. Now that's good. And then he sent in a merge request to me. And then I tested some more. And then I find another thing broken. I'm like, I can't merge this. And then I send it back to him. I send it with like 2 bugs. And then he's like, oh, I fixed that one. And I'm like, well, what about the other one? And then I haven't heard back from him. I got to release it like pretty soon.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just going to get delayed, and then we're going to release it after the big patch. We're going to separate the two things. I'm pretty sure is what we're going to do. But I guess it's in a good way, because I guess it probably would have sat on the shelf a lot longer had we not had the crunch time. But like, it's not getting out there when it's supposed to get out there, I guess, regardless.
There is only so many hours in a day, and there is only so much you guys can work on things. So
yeah,
I'm assuming that's probably like a client imposed deadline or something. So there might not be much of getting around that in terms of like release schedules. Is that a reasonable assessment?
It is the client's deadline.
Yeah.
I think we talked with them, and it is slightly negotiable, but
yeah, but really nothing you can do about that in terms of like your own processes, I guess.
Yeah. The guy we're working with, he wasn't even in the company. He was like an outside dev. Yeah, it's a pain. It's a pain regardless.
Yeah, understandable. This is only really like, to what degree can you improve yourself? Because you can't really affect the world around you, at least as a rank and file dev.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the problem with that was how we were, whether we had a continuous or a dynamic release schedule. I guess that probably wasn't even the problem.
Yeah, but if you do have something like you have to ship every couple of weeks, you do notice tickets starting to pile up towards the end of that, or towards the end of the month, where like very little testing is going on in the beginning of that because, well, oftentimes there's not that much to test, let's be honest. But
yeah,
towards the end of that release, everything is getting tested all the time. And, you know, there's a bazillion tickets on the board that were once in development but are now in testing. And the testers are really behind and they need help. Having everybody work in this a train leaves the station every month kind of situation. In the beginning, there's a lot of pressure on the devs to get things done really quickly. And then in the end, there's a lot of pressure on the testers to get things done really quickly.
Yeah.
And you can try to pipeline that. Like you can try to have a soft release in the middle of that where everything's roughly got to be done. And then you start on the thing for the next release cycle on the second half. And then you like go back and forth between bug fixes and the new features. And that kind of helps. But then you're kind of like splitting your attention almost, which you would be doing in like a less continuous release cycle as well. But the time frames are much more flexible in that sense.
Yeah. What I've seen work well is if you do have to coordinate between multiple teams, is if you got like a bi-weekly release thing, then you have the dev team on their week. If you stagger it that way, the dev team has like a hard cutoff and then it goes to the QA. And then anything that bounces back, the dev team works on. That way, once it passes like the QA, then you're good. Like the QA always has a week to work on it, you know?
Yeah.
Because the dev team has a week to work on it, then the QA, then the dev.
Yeah, and in that way, you're giving the devs a more flexible schedule. Because like if they really do need to push something by a day, like there's just a game-breaking bug that needs to get fixed, that can happen in that point because the train is not leaving the station for another week or two.
Yeah.
The development part of this is the more time inflexible part. If you have like 2 testers and 10 tickets, if you had 3 testers, you could probably speed it up because instead of 2 testers doing 5 tickets, the 3 testers could do 3 1/3 tickets or something like that.
Yeah.
If the tickets are like interrelated, you could still do like 4, 4, and 2 or something like that.
Yeah, testing's pretty tedious, I get. That's one of those things you can usually speed up just because they just got to try so many different things.
But if you have like a big feature that has to be delivered that interacts with a whole bunch of other features, sometimes just having 2 people on that problem is not going to speed it up any more than you would with 1 person. So
yeah,
I think like it kind of does help with the more like inflexible schedules. And that is a really good way to work around it. And it's what I've witnessed previously as well, where you don't have good deploy on demand things set up.
Yeah.
Which is really just how do you fit like a time inelastic thing into another time inelastic thing. The lubricant that makes everything work well is just not tying to things that have to have their own specific lengths and shapes, trying not to fit them within one another.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. It's basically what ends up happening if you have a dynamic release schedule. You know, you hand it off to somebody else and then they have so long to work on it. So it's sort of making it act more that way. That way it's not like a whole bunch of things piling up.
Yeah, I guess if you do that with like a static release schedule, it's like you're virtualizing a dynamic release schedule on top of it, right? The devs are kind of just doing whatever. There are some hints that they need to get something off to QA soon, but
yeah,
the devs are kind of doing whatever, and then they're very heavily detached from the release cycle. And then although your QA does have to meet the release cycle, they're just kind of getting things all throughout that time period. So beginning of the month, end of the month, etc.
Yep.
And then that still does lead to situations where you do need to merge something in like multiple days after it was ready. to the main trunk branch because it wasn't going to be ready for the one release and you need to delay it. So it's
keeps
just kind of like
getting
sitting
bounced back
there
and
and the
forth.
branch is rotting and you got to like, rebase it and junk. So it's still not ideal, but it's better than, everybody crunching.
Yes, that is very much not ideal, but I get what you're saying. Better to deal with some bad merge requests rather than just, I don't know, failing to deliver anything on time.
Yeah. Well, in this case, it wouldn't even be like failing to deliver. It'd be like delivering something too early before it was cooked and probably introducing some pretty gnarly bugs.
Yeah. That's the most annoying thing, is releasing something before it's ready,
Mm-hmm.
which happens way more often than I would like.
I've been on pretty static release schedules before. I feel like a lot of those are definitely like not really the fault of the release schedule. It's more the fault of, well, it can be the fault of both, but it's mostly the fault of like a client needs this right now.
Yeah.
If you do have like a hotfix system in place or an unscheduled release system, you can just put something out on Wednesday instead of your usual patch Tuesday if you really need to. But there's always that conflict of like, that's kind of a bad thing to do. So
I feel like it's more of a communication error. It's what gets you into those situations. Like someone knows that they're going to release something that's very much unstable, but they don't want to like tell the client to like the last minute. And by then they're just like, okay, I'm not going to tell the client. And then you're like,
or somebody client facing says something that they shouldn't. And they're like, oh yeah, this feature will be ready by this time. And then the development team is like, no, it will not be.
Yeah.
You either have to save the other person's face or there's a potential for damaging that relationship if it doesn't ship on time.
That's one of the good times when I'm a pessimist. The client's like, oh, we need this in like 2 weeks. I'm like, yeah, dude, you're going to need 3, like at least.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you get done ahead of time, they're like, oh, cool.
Always set expectations low. That's a great rule of thumb.
As long as you're not the one who has to worry if the client walks or not. Because
well, yeah,
if someone can promise something better, then they'll probably take it.
Well, we're not in a sales position, so I feel like that's reasonable. I think that engineers kind of have a reputation for being pessimistic, and the salespeople have a reputation for being overly optimistic.
Yeah, definitely.
So if you have an internal salesperson, balancing that out with a good dose of pessimism will deliver them the real truth a lot of the time, regardless.
I do think one of the advantages, though, of continuous development is that things often get prioritized more. So what I mean by that is whenever you do a dynamic release schedule, oftentimes a lot of focus might get put into one thing, and that one thing might get worked on for like way longer than it should. Like it might just be a minor feature and it's a very important thing. If you do like a weekly release schedule, you're constantly aware of deadlines. You constantly have to like prioritize various things because they might have to come out at a certain point.
That launches into another great point, which is that your release schedule is not your development cycle, largely. Like you can still run a 2 or a 3 or a 1 week sprint cycle on top of that. And it doesn't really like matter when you release, because the real important part of the agile process is checking in and making sure that you're working on what you're supposed to be working on and that you're reactive to the need to changes. So if you're not doing that every week or two, then you're not going to know that you need to maybe can something.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can sync up your release with the end of a sprint, sure, but that's not like a necessity, I feel.
Well, what I mean by that is you can always be like, oh, I'll get around to that later. I'm almost done with this. And the hard part is you don't know how long things take with software because things that seem easy are not. So, and sometimes things that seem hard are not hard. You can perpetually be in a state of, I'm almost done with this and I will get to the next thing afterwards. Whereas if you have a hard release schedule, you're like, okay, well, I'm making no progress with this. I can swap to the other one and see if I can get that one done and then hopefully get something released by the end of the week.
I don't know if that's like when your software gets deployed, though. That's just kind of like when you got to report back to see what you did. Going back to your product manager and saying, yeah, this ain't going to work for the end of this sprint, which may not correlate with a release. You might be releasing elsewhere or at another time.
Yeah, you might be right. Yeah,
because there's like the internal accountability part of like agile, I guess, and like that's where the sprints I feel do a great job. But tying your release schedule to an internal reporting structure, I feel like there's no reason to do that.
Yeah.
GitHub recently changed its closed issue color from red to purple, which I believe is the same purple as the merge request merged color. Needless to say, people on the internet behaved in the exact same way you would expect a whole bunch of people on the internet to behave, and there was some consternation about this. So I'm kind of curious, Miles, to get your stance on this very hot button issue and see if you'll choose a hill to die on here.
I like the change. I'm going to be honest. Red's very aggressive. Red, we know, is bad. But is closed always bad? No, I feel like it's a bit more ambiguous. So what do you choose? Purple. Purple makes sense. Purple is not a hot color. It's not a cold color. It's right. It's ambiguous. Like nobody knows what purple is for. It's got no meaning other than like royalty associated with it. So in the sense of software, it doesn't mean anything. So I think that's a good thing. Closed issues, often they're like a whole lot of nothing.
Or they're just an issue that you resolved. Like they're a whole lot of something, but they're fixed.
What do you mean by closed?
Well, I don't think GitHub really distinguishes between issues that are closed because like they're not problems and issues that are closed because they were problems, but they're no longer problems because you fixed them. So it is kind of ambiguous, right? Like there's the, I will not fix this because this is not a problem, or the, this was misreported or something kind of closed. And then there's like the, oh yes, thank you for pointing that out. Here is the fix that fixes this kind of closed.
Oh, yeah. Which I think that if it's a fix that you solve something, I feel like you don't want that to be read anyway. Like, once again, red is like bad and aggressive.
I think if anything, an opened issue should be red because that's like a potential problem with the project almost.
Exactly.
And like a closed issue should be green if we're going with the red and green color scheme, although for other reasons, that's a bad idea.
Exactly. Purple is ambiguous, and I feel like closed should either be ambiguous or a good thing, not a negative thing, if that makes any sense.
Totally agreed. And also, red-green color blindness is a thing, so
yeah.
They do a good job of sorting it by open and closed on the issues thing, but I think you can have like a unified issues view where like you see all of the opened and closed ones, so.
Honestly, I kind of wish things weren't so tied to color. When I do art, I do black and white. So like, I don't like that everything to do with organization is color coded. Obviously, it seems a little unfriendly to the colorblind, but another thing, it seems kind of weird.
Yeah.
If I'm going to be 100% honest.
Yeah. Well, GitHub does a pretty good job of this where like they have a dot in the middle of an open issue and they have a check in the middle of a closed issues like icon. So
exactly.
It is distinguishable even if it is red and green, but
yeah,
I still feel like purple and green will help people recognize things better at a glance, because even though colors should not be relied upon, they can be a big help.
They definitely can be, yeah.
So if you have the option to make it significantly different for somebody, then you should, because that makes it easier for them to scan. Whereas if you had it like red and green, like you can tell, but depending on how red-green colorblind they are, it might be more difficult than if it were purple-green, and
yeah,
it's less readable that way.
And going back to the thing you said where it is now in the same category as merged and stuff like that, I think that's good because it's very similar to something like merged and all of where you often don't merge branches in until they're done and complete, which fits well with closed.
Yeah, it's a logical resolution. Purple is the color of resolution on GitHub, right? That's how this should be thought of.
I guess.
Although with not merge requests, it's still red, so it's the color of missed connections. I don't know.
Missed connection.
Your merge request got messed up, so you gotta redo it.
Yeah.
It's the color of redoing it.
The color of redoing.
The color of oops.
The color of yeah, red's the color of oops. That's exactly what I'm saying. You don't want closed mixed with oops. That doesn't make any sense.
Yep. Great point. So I would actually like to speculate as to why people don't like this, because I haven't read any points to the contrary at all, actually. It's mostly been commentary on how the internet has reacted, but no actual substantive points. So I'm going to guess that people are writing automated bots that scan the UI and they only scan by color of the icon to determine whether it's an open or closed issue.
Considering text is easier to search than color codes, I would imagine that's probably not it, but I like the thought.
Okay, how about people are using bulls to determine whether issues are closed, and the bulls do not react as well to the purple?
This is probably it. I think you're onto something.
Yes. The internet is just a whole bunch of matadors on GitHub.
Now, what really makes me think is, what do you think caused this change internally?
That's a good question. They put up a blog post and...
Oh, they did?
Yeah, they did put up a blog post on this.
Oh, she did.
So this is actually part of a bigger change where they're going to have two issue closed statuses. So they're going to either closed resolved or closed as won't fix, duplicate, invalid, etc.
Okay, and the purple one, I'm assuming, is resolved?
Yes.
Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, so it's like a light gray for the draft. It's like a darker gray for the closed as like won't fix, which makes sense because most of the won't fix tags are either red or gray. So
yeah,
I'm assuming they're probably moving away from red in general because it's less... I don't know. Red is less of a nice color. It's definitely my least favorite color.
What? It is literally my favorite color.
Ew.
It's fun.
It's aggressive. It's
Yeah, like what do you want? Blue? Like
it's
I
like the
don't know.
id of colors. No, blue's lame.
Exactly.
It's
Like,
corporate.
I don't know. What's your favorite color?
My favorite
Green?
color? Oh, my favorite color is yellow. Yellow's nice and inviting and bright. You can see it really
Oh my god.
well.
Nobody that is literally the least popular color. Like
Yellow is
I'm
the
not
best
even
color.
kidding.
Don't
It
even.
is actually the least favorite color
It has
of
a
every.
great complement in purple. It's nice. It's visible. I think that everything should be yellow.
Yellow is either too bright or it's if you dim it down, it's ugly. If
It does
it's
have
too
problems
close
at
to
lower
white light.
luminances, but yellow is a great color when it's used appropriately. Like a nice pastel yellow. It's like white but with personality.
Okay, every color has their use, but I feel like yellow, first off, has much less use, and second off, it's ugly, bro. It's ugly.
It's
I'm
better
not
than
gonna lie.
blue.
Like red's tacky. Don't get me wrong. Red's tacky.
Like red is
And
if you
blue's
want somebody to
overused.
like eat something or like get angry at
Like
something.
the only thing I like less than yellow is freaking orange. But anyway, that's.
Orange is also pretty bad. Orange, it has too much red in it.
I like how it's the color in between our two favorite colors, and we're like, that is actually the worst color.
One thing we can agree on.
But anyway, yeah, I do think that red, because it has such a strong connotation, it does need to be reserved for if we are going to use it for color coding. You know, it is known as being an aggressive color. And once again, purple is very ambiguous, and I kind of like that. And GitHub does seem to use purple as more of a positive thing. So I'm glad that they're differentiating between the two closed, and that
That's true. My only question now is that pipeline failures are still red. So are we going to change pipeline passing to purple because that also indicates a successful resolution of something? But then we probably have to change failure to something else because red and purple are really close.
I mean, I bet that is the path they're going down, because whenever you change something so fundamental about your UI like this, I'm sure it's like a big talk, especially internally, because they know people don't like change.
I'm sure it was a big talk, but fundamentalness is that might be overselling it a bit. I mean, the internet is one thing, but I'm not quite sure if the color of a resolved issue thing.
Well, whenever you move anything like a back button, it shouldn't matter, but people are used to things, and if you needlessly change something, you know, you often feel like there needs to be a good reason to change something that's been there for a while, especially whenever it comes to something like organization.
I suppose.
So I feel like, especially because you said they put like a blog post about this.
Well, it's
Do
not.
they-
It's
do
not
they
a blog
normally
post. It's like a public roadmap issue thing. It's like a GitHub issue, but it's more like a blog post.
Okay, anyway, I could see them probably trying to like change a couple different things, because I don't know, I feel like changing this one thing and leaving other inconsistencies might be confusing and kind of weird.
You heard it here first, folks. Passing pipelines are going to be purple.
If they're willing to change like that, I don't see why they wouldn't be willing to change something else to like keep things consistent.
And that's the show. Thanks to Meydän, that's Meyda with an umlaut N, for their track The Beauty of Maths, licensed under the Creative Commons Attribution 3.0 license, which serves as our intro, outro, and interlude music. You can find more in the description of this episode. Please remember that the opinions expressed in this production may not reflect those of other participants on the show, or those of any participant's past, current, or future employers. They're also probably exaggerated a bit for comedy's sake. Anyway, thanks for tuning in.